It's LSU, and that's the game I think everybody is kind of looking to. I mean, we talked about Georgia, but Georgia's not a game you have to win, Frank. I mean,
if you've already beaten LSU, you do not, and Oklahoma. If you've taken care of your business at that point, you got to play better than 52-17.
Yeah.
You can't come out of there thinking we can't win this thing, which you talked about a little bit on episode number 1, the coaches, the players, to be able to compete, kind of like the feeling they got last year. You've got to have a better showing than 52-17. But you're right. You don't have to win that game.
I think chalk would be Ole Miss is an underdog to Georgia at home. I think right now some of the betting services have that game as anywhere from a 5 to 7 point underdog or Georgia favorite. And the other game will be LSU. Now, here's the interesting part of LSU. I think right now Ole Miss would be anywhere from a 1 to a 3 point underdog in Death Valley. But LSU opens the season against
USC.
I think it's in Las Vegas.
Yes.
So
on a Sunday.
On a Sunday, and we're all going to be tuned into that because we love college football. But mainly, Ole Miss fans are going to be tuned into that because that's a big game.
That's a big
LSU
game.
drops that one, then all of a sudden nobody's talking about this game either. LSU has to go to South Carolina.
Yeah.
That's not going to be easy if they've already fallen to USC. They're not rolling out the red carpet for Brian Kelly right now. Nussmeier is not a quarterback that I've seen that can just throw it all over the field. If it weren't for Jaden Daniels, Ole Miss wins that game handily last year. He was incredible. With Malik Neighbors, even with Neighbors in that receiving core, LSU was pedestrian in a lot of positions with the exception of Jaden Daniels, who was incredible at quarterback.
Can they play defense? I think every Rebel TV is going to be tuned in to the Sunday afternoon game, opening weekend, Labor Day weekend, to see if they can play defense. They got fabulous, probably one of the best defensive players, but I don't know if they know if they're using him correctly.
Right,
and they've got a new defensive coaching staff.
Yeah,
and Brian Kelly is a culture guy. We're talking about Lane Kiffin's culture. Brian Kelly is a culture guy. Listen to this. 3rd year at Central Michigan, 9 wins. Only the second time since 1980 that Central Michigan had 9 wins. 3rd year at Cincinnati, Orange Bowl. 3rd year at Notre Dame, BCS National Championship game. He has this history of.
He has a pedigree.
And particularly in year 3. Year 3 at each one of these schools, he achieved lofty things that had not been achieved at those schools recently.
It will be interesting to me. You know, we could talk all day about the history of Saturday night in Death Valley.
I know.
And you talk about Dan Bourne, who's the PA announcer, who I've been able to meet, and it's really cool to meet him when he says, as the sun sets over the western sky, it's Saturday night in Death Valley, and it gives me chills just thinking about it. Now, I'll be able to see that in person and hear that, and that's just a life moment for all of you. If you're watching, you get a chance to go to LSU. If you've never been, you got to go. But let's talk about football for a moment. And, you know, we could go all day about Ole Miss's record at night in Death Valley, and it's not great. So many games in Death Valley that Ole Miss has played in, they've come out on the losing end. But here's the kicker, Frank. When Jevin Snead was a quarterback back in 2008, Ole Miss just wiped the field with LSU. Mm-hmm. Back in 1997, Ole Miss had a better team than LSU, and they won the game. So I go back to roster management. We've seen what Brian Kelly has done. I don't know how well he's done from a roster standpoint versus what Ole Miss has done, specifically in the portal. And we could talk about Ole Miss's defense all day, and it is laced with portal talent. And they've been able to go and get some of the best players in the country thanks to the Grove Collective and the prowess of the recruiting of Pete Golding, the defensive coordinator, and head coach Lane Kiffin. You talk about players like Walter Nolan, Princely Umanilan, the transfer out of Florida, Chris Pupal, the leading tackler from Arkansas, Chris Graves, the transfer. I could go on and on. Trey Amos, the transfer out of Alabama. Brandon Turnage, who is actually a walk-on, but signed with Alabama out of high school, transferred to Tennessee, and wanted to come back home and play for Ole Miss, played at Lafayette County in nearby Oxford. So he is a player, and he's one of many that I think it goes back to the fact of who's got the best roster. And I'm quoting Nick Saban when I say, people say I'm a great coach, but I've won all the games I've won because we've had really good football players. And I go back to, if Ole Miss has a good or a better roster than LSU, I get the theatrics. I get the earthquake game in 1988 against Auburn when Eddie Fuller caught the pass and the earthquake went off in Tiger Stadium. I understand all the comebacks that they've had against Alabama and Florida. But if Ole Miss has a better roster than LSU, I'm taking Ole Miss down in Baton Rouge.